Welcome to the Vernuncio Novak Report from New York. This is Frank Vernuncio.
And from Washington, this is Daria Novak.
Well, Daria, one of the stories behind the stories that we've been talking about lately, particularly off air, is this new influence of the mob that we're seeing. We're hearing that courts are reluctant to challenge some of the election results, just as they were reluctant to challenge some of the incidents where we saw a policeman get into an altercation with a perpetrator. The perpetrator perhaps came at the cop with a knife or engaged in some kind of aggressive activity. The policeman was forced to draw a weapon. And rather than discuss the merits of the case, was the policeman right to do this? Was he wrong to do it? We've heard that the immediate reaction has to be against the policeman because we're afraid that the mob will riot if the court looks into this too closely and says, well, in this case, the cop was right to draw his weapon. We're seeing in boards of elections around the country and in some court cases involving police and perpetrators that the courts or boards of elections are afraid to issue an objective ruling for fear of inciting the mob. And of course, the larger issue overall is that many are saying, even if the evidence is there that there was significant cheating in a particular state during the election of 2020, we can't overturn the result because, after all, the people in that state, some of them will riot if we change the results based on new evidence. Daria, when did it get to the point where American justice or American elections are subject to the will of a violent mob?
Frank, my first answer to you would be, if possible, to say it hasn't happened. But the reality is we're facing a situation today that I believe is unprecedented in modern history in this country. We have a minority of people that are very vocal, and they're aided by big money coming in from progressive left, from probably overseas. If we could actually find out where, it probably would end up countries like China and Russia and Iran and places like that. We're seeing others trying to disturb the American way of life. This is not just about objecting to a particular candidate or a particular position on a campaign. This is literally trying to overturn what is America. The part that scares me, Frank, also is that when you talk about the mob ruling, we have such an anti-police effort in this country by the left that we are going to lose good policemen. We're going to lose good first responders that would normally be able to handle the stress, because it is just overwhelming, not only for them, but for their families. They're receiving death threats. They're being prosecuted in ways that they should not be prosecuted for doing their job. Now, I'll be the first one, and I know you would too, that say that if a police officer is doing something wrong, he has to follow the law. He needs to be judged and punished if that's the case. But many of the police officers that are being accused of things, we're finding out that it was not the way it was portrayed, and they're being harmed, their careers, their families, their communities. We're seeing crimes, violent crimes go up in many areas. I know New York has had some problems with the police department. When we start to say that the mob is going to be the norm in how the country operates, we've lost our American way of life. Frank, I don't know if we can get it back in the short run. It's going to really take strong leadership from the top, and I don't see that coming out of a future White House or Congress.
Well, you look at a couple of different examples. We look at New York, which you brought up, and where I live and work. They eliminated bail in many cases, and the mayor openly sides with violent protesters, particularly when we've had the actions by Antifa or Black Lives Matter along the Fifth Avenue and other places throughout New York City. It is even worse in Portland, Oregon, where the mayor has openly sympathized with Antifa rioters. There was a case, I believe the journalist's name was Andy No, was simply acting as a journalist, taking pictures of an Antifa crowd in Portland, Oregon. And the crowd, for some reason, the Antifa types didn't like the fact that he was right there in the midst of it, recording the violence that they were doing. They proceeded to beat him senseless. They put him in the hospital. The mayor had ordered the police not to intervene what Antifa was doing. In fact, even the Portland City Council, I believe, the local government in Portland, was making ridiculous measures such as police can't use bullhorns to address the crowd because it was too intimidating. It defied any kind of logic. It is bad enough when violent crowds violate the law. It is worse when elected officials openly side with and indeed protect those committing violence. And you and I think the sort of the subtext of what we're both saying is that if indeed there is to be a Biden White House, and during the campaign, Biden refused almost every opportunity to say that violence is wrong, that what Antifa was doing was wrong. Will he do the same thing on a national level, what the mayors of places like New York City and Portland, Oregon have done on the local level?
You know, Frank, if we go back to the Vietnam War, I remember at one point the military were complaining because the politicians were attempting to run the war and to set up guidelines that were really impossible to follow for when they could shoot at the enemy, drop a bomb, or do anything. And as a result, we lost an awful lot of people. In Vietnam, you could only, if I recall, at certain points, you couldn't bomb anything that had a red cross on it or any dam. So what happened was the North Vietnamese would put their military equipment underneath tents with the Red Cross and literally on a dam, and we couldn't do anything about it. There's another rule: you couldn't shoot until you see the whites of the eyes of your enemy. In the middle of a jungle, you're not going to. It was so ridiculous, the rules of engagement. And I think we're seeing the same sort of thing today. There's calls to defund the police. There's calls to take away their guns. In this country, this is not going to work when we have violent cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, and New York today too. It's absolutely ridiculous to try to say, let's tie the hands of the police behind their back and ask them to risk their lives to protect the individuals in their area. You know, we're not being rational about this. If we have a problem with the police, and in some areas we do, we correct the problem. You know, Frank, I just don't understand why so many politicians are calling for defunding or close to defunding the police when they are all that stand between us and anarchy.
Particularly when those same politicians who call for defunding the police use, many cases, municipal funds to hire private security for themselves, their homes, and their families. That's just a bit hypocritical. You know, Daria, I've never understood the concept of taking weapons away from either honest citizens or, in fact, the police. Does anyone truly believe that by passing a law against guns, that a criminal, and we have talked about this before, who is going to rob, rape, or kill is going to say, oh my goodness, I'd better not have a weapon. I could get in trouble. You know, the ludicrousness of the argument is just overwhelming.
My favorite is when they declare gun-free zones. The only people that obey that are law-abiding citizens who use their weapons responsibly or carry them responsibly. If you see a school zone that says gun-free zone and someone is going to go in there with a gun, they're only going to go in there if they have evil purposes. You know, anybody who is law-abiding is going to follow the sign, but those are not the people we have to be concerned about. So when these politicians set up these rules like you can't bring a gun into certain office buildings, it just doesn't make sense, because we're talking about somebody who is intent on doing harm, and they're not a law-abiding, rule-following individual. That's not the norm of their behavior. And yet somehow the liberals in this country think by just putting up a sign, they're going to change criminal behavior. The reality is we have to change the culture of violence. where we see in Chicago, for instance, that it's acceptable to have gang members carrying guns, illegal guns, Saturday night specials, the ones that aren't registered, the people who are not law-abiding citizens protecting themselves or their families. I think we need a whole new discussion on it, because even the state of Virginia is now attempting to ban guns. It's getting ridiculous in this country. The only people that are going to have guns are the criminals.
I guess we could have deterred Bonnie and Clyde and all of the bank robbers by simply putting a sign in the window of every bank. This is a gun-free zone.
That's it. I want rational. I don't care if it's a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, or a conservative. I want rational policies. I'll compromise. We're not asking in this country for extremes. What we need is a middle of the road, good policy in this country regarding violence. When something goes wrong, we have rule of law. We can fix what's wrong in the country. And I don't think that the way to fix it is to have mob rule.
And unfortunately, that's what we've seen over the past couple of years. If you look, you try to get from your elected officials rational policies, policies that make sense, policies that are consistent. And what we're seeing in so many different areas, particularly, for example, in COVID compliance, we've seen mayors and governors issue edicts and they immediately break their own edicts. It's okay for them to go to restaurants. I think there was one called the French Laundry out in California, where the governor basically said no one should go out to eat, and there he goes out to eat. The mayor of another city in the Midwest said you shouldn't travel unless it's absolutely necessary. Then he hops a plane to go visit his family for Thanksgiving. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Frank, I got to ask you this question. Can you please explain the logic to me where some towns are forcing businesses to close at 4 o'clock in the afternoon due to COVID? What, do the germs only wake up at 4:01 p.m.?
Well, they're part of the germ union, you see, and their working hours are not beyond 4 p.m. I deal with a lot of
businesses. There's suicide rates in Japan over COVID have gone so high that more females in Japan are committing suicide right now than are dying from COVID. It's gotten ridiculous. We have high rates of violence in this country, family violence, drug addiction, alcoholism is rising. Mental health issues of all types are spiking. It's horrific. Nobody is looking at the overall picture. This virus is bad. I get it. We need to protect ourselves, but we've got to be rational.
Daria, let's go to our first guest. Evie Angelikas is actually one of the more distinguished political strategists in the world. She is an immigrant who fled to New York, escaping communism, and she notes how Dominion Company's technology played a part in Serbia. And George Soros apparently has a role in Dominion Software. Evie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a bit about coming to America from Serbia.
Well, I came to America from Albania, which is
Albania, okay,
close to it. Yes, it's in the Balkans. And I left Albania in 1998, and I've been here for 22 years. Obviously, we grew up in a very socialist country. We went through communism and socialism, and the system changed in 1991. And that's when George Soros decided to start spreading his wings in Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, and Macedonia, which is pretty much the Balkans.
Now, I understand that you believe that George Soros plays a role in the Dominion Company, which of course is much in the news in the American election.
Well, they have a lot of offices in Serbia, and those offices are pretty much the ones where they program the machines. But Dominion has a back office or the headquarters in Canada, and in that building they were sharing office space with an organization that does belong, in fact, to George Soros. So it will be extremely unlikely that there's not a direct connection in between George Soros and Dominion. Maybe he was not one of the original founders, but he definitely came along at some point in time and, used it in his benefits for, things that we know, not just here in America, by the way, but in the Balkans, in Europe, and Philippines, all the states that basically he has, an office and is operating his own agenda.
Now, I understand you mentioned that the Dominion has offices in Canada. Is it accurate to say that the Canadian government chose not to use Dominion for their own elections?
I'm not sure if they do or they don't, but I can tell you that one of the founders is a Serbian living in Canada. So I do not know if there is a direct connection with the government of Canada and Dominion. It may be simply that this individual, the founders, just happen to be living in Canada. I really don't know if there is a connection with the government of Canada. I can't, we can't say for sure.
I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I was speaking to somebody formerly with the US government who said that this software has been used overseas to overturn elections. And he seemed pretty specific. I don't want to go too much on the air with what he was telling me, but he was very specific about the fact that this could be used to change with something with the algorithms, a large number of votes. Do you think we see a large number of votes impacted in this country, or do you think there's only a small amount that may not have actually changed the election?
No, absolutely changed the election. That information is absolutely true. The Dominion are the machines itself. However, they operate with a software called Smartmatic, and Smartmatic is the one that basically does the switching of the votes and so on. And I've gone and I've seen training sessions online on how to do just that. And as a matter of fact, even Dominion, when they were advertising their business, one of the main things that they were saying was exactly the capability of changing the outcome of an election in favor of one party. And it can't get more specific than that these machines and this software was meant exactly to do this. And as a matter of fact, Smartmatic, one of the original founders was Hugo Chavez. And apparently he had about 28% interest on the business itself. And eventually we know why he used it. And from then, Smartmatic entered a contract with Dominion sometime in 2007. And as you know, the rest is history. I mean, it's a very well put together system. And it's a pity that arrived in America. There is word, and I'm sure at some point this will come out, that many states have taken bribes in order for them to use, because this is a vendor that is doing business with the government of different states, 28 states in America. So that's a pity that we don't have a system in place to check very well what we're getting, who we're doing business with, and especially when it comes to election, which is the most important thing that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that it's absolutely fair at all times.
So could we go back to, like when I was young, what I'll call mechanical machines? You actually pulled the lever down physically, you saw your vote counted before you left the machine. Would that be up to states to decide to change, to go to that type of machine again? And is it better?
Probably, but that's definitely the best way of having a fair election. I remember, this was the machine that I used in 2008, which was the first time I had the right to vote. And it felt way more comfortable. And not only do we need to go back to that manual way of doing the things, but we also absolutely need voter ID, because it stops the fraud right there. And to be honest with you, we have had a lot of voter fraud in Albania, in Serbia, in Romania, in Kosovo. And these are the countries that I said before, George Soros has been operating for a long time. And in Albania, we have the prime minister being a socialist who's running for a third term this coming April. And the opposition knows very well they are going to steal the votes. And as a matter of fact, the government has paid about 20 million just recently for a contract with Smartmatic. And, it's so obvious. But I'm happy that this came out on the open here in the United States. So countries like Albania that don't have the capabilities that America has, they can see what's happening. Because if we resolve this issue in here, we're going to give hope to other countries to follow suit and stop George Soros and stop voter fraud.
Senator Jesh Hawley in the United States Senate has introduced legislation which basically says that we should go back to a more simpler form of voting. Forget the mail-in ballots, unless, of course, you're ill or away from home. Forget the internet-connected balloting systems like Smartmatic or Dominion machines, and just go back to those basic concepts. We see strong objection to that from the Democratic Party. Do you feel that's basically an advocacy of allowing the possibility of cheating?
Absolutely. There's no discussion about that. We know, they cheated already. I've been very involved with the Trump campaign, and I've been out there in the past year and a half in rallies and boat parades, and I've been in contact with a lot of immigrants that support President Trump. And there is such enthusiasm with the people and the support and the way that they love this president. And we were sure that we were going to win this in landslide. And then on the other hand, you have Joe Biden, that every time he goes to do a rally, he didn't have more than 60 people. He didn't do much of a campaign out there. And all of a sudden, you get 80 million votes that are going to him. Of course, there has been voter fraud. And I can tell you this, there's no way Hillary Clinton didn't do the same thing in 2016. She was so confident she was going to win 2016, is that they probably underestimated the amount of people that may vote for Donald Trump. That's how Donald Trump got 2016. It probably was a landslide. They did still vote, and they didn't calculate how many they needed. This is why right now we see that Joe Biden has more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, Hillary Clinton in 2016, Obama in 2012. So, of course, the voter fraud is here. We just need to take action to stop it because we can't allow this in the United States of America.
Based on your observations of elections, both in Eastern Europe and in the United States, do you find it perplexing that Joe Biden did better than expected, but only in the states that were swing states? Do you see any logical way that could have occurred, that's consistent?
No, we don't. I mean, this is obviously those were the states that they can play the hardest. And remember, the swing states usually are states that are mostly, Democrats. And for example, Michigan, I know that we have a lot of people, a lot of Albanians, the Albanian community that was very strong going to vote for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, these people were registered Democrats. So they knew this was going to happen. And this is why we see the games being played in those states. And this is an excellent playground for them because they have, there was a video circling around in which they were training the people flat out, telling them what to do and how to steal the vote. And if you find it in, states like Michigan or Chicago or, Pennsylvania, that there is a crowd that will get, what can be bribed, basically. That's the idea. So it's nothing unusual.
One of the things I was thinking about was if the individual states agree to change the software or the machines that they're using, what kind of cost is the country facing and how long would it actually take to replace all of these machines, test them and train people to use them? Could it be done before the next presidential election, do you think?
Absolutely. It's going to be very easy because going back to basic is not an issue. There's not much training, and we need to do it ASAP. And I hope that this can happen because North Carolina, as a matter of fact, they are pushing for voter ID, and it seems that may be passed. And if that happens in North Carolina, we need to do it in every other state because this is major. It doesn't even matter how much money it costs or how much money we lost in the process by hiring vendors like Dominion and Smartmatic, and there are a bunch of them, by the way. Because in the end of the day, there's nothing more important than having a free and fair election. Nothing else matters. I mean, if Democrats take over like this is a way of first they take our vote and then they take our voice and freedom of speech. Everything will be gone. So this is a fight that we really need to bring it to the end. I've seen what's happening in the Balkans. To me, it hurts me to see the same scenario happening in America. And when I speak on TV in the Balkans, they think that I'm crazy. They don't believe that this is happening in the United States of America. I mean, people literally do not believe it, but it is here, and we need to fight it.
No matter what software systems are used, no matter what hardware systems are used, having that equipment hooked up to the internet seems to be a waste of time. It doesn't seem to make anything better. Why did we find out so late in the game, despite all the denials from the Democratic Party, from Dominion, that their machines were not hooked up to the internet, that they were in fact hooked up to the internet? Why was that kept secret for so long? And what effect do you think that had on the election?
Well, that's how they did the switching of the votes, and everything was done basically from their offices in Serbia. You need to connect to internet, and the fact why they kept it a secret is exactly this, because they didn't want to let anybody know what was to come. But again, the only problem, I mean, it was done so massively. This is the reason that everything stopped. We stopped the counting on November 3rd, sometime around, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and everything by 4 a.m., it was enough time for them to upload the votes, do the switching of the votes. There is a few ways that they were doing this, basically. And, you can't do it without the internet. How you're going to do it from a country outside of the United States if you're not connected via internet? But the hypocrisy of Democrats doesn't shock me. Them saying that even Dominion said that there's no way the machine is connected to the internet. And we find out that, in fact, that was a lie. And this should be reason enough for the government to go after Dominion and take very harsh measures and actions against these people.
So blatantly, Dominion was caught in an absolute lie. They swore basically, we are not hooked up to the internet. They did turn out to be hooked up to the internet. What's the next step? Do you feel that the country perhaps is reluctant to look more closely at the election results based on Dominion's lying, because to some extent that'll incite a mob, it'll incite riots and violence?
Well, I'm afraid we may end up there, because I don't think Democrats understand that the American people are sick and tired of everything they've put us through this year alone. I'm not even going to go to what they've done previously, but everything they've put us through this year, in between COVID, lockdowns, destroying businesses, bail reform, letting criminals on the streets. At least in New York City, homeless people are everywhere. So there is a bunch of things going on together, and I see it. I have a few groups on Facebook that are Trump related, and we have over 300,000 members. And you can see the frustration. And those are, many of them are people that say they were Democrats and they converted and they walked away from the Democratic Party. So we may end up there. And I don't think the Democrats are going to let this go. They are going to fight. And so is the media, which is the biggest enemy that we have right now. And so is everybody that is behind the Democrats, including George Soros, that are spending all the money that they can on getting done, reaching their goals, basically, because they're just, this is a coup d'etat. That's what it's happening right now. That's what we're living in. And that's what it was the same method they used in Albania in 2007, and in a few others in Romania, the same thing. this is happening right now in here. And, it's a game that we've seen it before played in front of our eyes.
So what is our game plan going forward to correct this? How do we win back the vote in the sense of having an accurate vote in the future? What do we need to do?
Well, unless President Trump is reelected and back in the White House, we have no chance of repairing this again. So everybody needs to work very hard and make sure that he is in the White House. We cannot give up. And once he is in the White House, I guarantee you, he is never going to let this happen to somebody else ever again. And he probably will push the voter ID, and he probably will push and get rid of software, especially softwares are not even made in America, but we shouldn't even use software. They are very vulnerable to threats, to manipulation. We need to go back to manually counting them, and that's about it. That's all there is to it.
Right now, the eyes of the nation are turned towards the state of Georgia. Do you see, because so much attention is focused on that one state, do you see a possibility of voter cheating going on there as well? Or do you think there's too much attention, particularly after the questions about the presidential election, to allow anyone to cheat in the state of Georgia?
Well, it may happen, but of course, RNC is going to be there. A lot of Republicans are going to the state. I know that the young Republicans from New York are going there for 3-4 days. So a lot of people are being mobilized going to Georgia on December 31st, and between December 31st until the election. Are they going to try? Of course they're going to try, because they understand how important Georgia is to them, as important as it is to us. Are they going to succeed? That is to be seen. I hope not, because I have a feeling that the people in Georgia also voted for the president, and I'm sure that at least one of our guys will get that raise. But it's to be seen. I hope not. The attention is in there, like you said, but Democrats are going to try to take that away, and we'll see how that's going to play out.
I don't think anyone objects to both sides playing hard. I think the question is, will either side play, will at least one of the sides play fair? Do you feel, as long as Dominion machines or smart tech software is involved, do you feel that precludes the possibility of a fair election?
No, I don't. If Dominion is still in play, unless they change the system, no, I do not believe it, because they did it once. They're going to do it again. There's no question about it. You need to understand, they do not have shame when it comes to doing those kind of stuff. Because if they did, I mean, this was a massive election fraud, massive. Then you have the media just claiming and saying that he is the projected Biden is the projected winner. So I see them do anything. And on November 3rd, I was in D.C. With a campaign, and in the morning I said to myself, you know what? Democrats are so unpredictable in the level of nonsense that they threw our way. What is going to happen today, right? You never know what's going to happen. And by the evening, we couldn't believe it. They stopped the counting. And then by the morning, all the swing states turn around from 700,000 votes that President Trump had in Pennsylvania. In the morning, you had 10,000 Biden leading with 10,000 votes. So the level of evil that is coming, and this doesn't include the Democrats of America. You have plenty of honest Democrats in America that can see right through what the party is doing, and they are walking away, which is excellent. And if you think this is not even the Democratic Party anymore, this is a Socialist Democratic Party of America, and most Democrats are walking away alongside with Republicans. And I think everything is shifting. There's not even a Democratic Party or Republican Party anymore. I mean, people are coming together. They are seeing what's happening in the government, and hopefully, in the next year, the citizens of this great country will come together and will get rid of what's evil, and start having a normal life again. And we need to get rid of individuals like Joe Biden. We need to get rid of mass media like CNN and all the MSNBC. We need to change those. And this is not for us. This is for the future generations. So this is the time for every American to do something and change it. Because if they take this time over, we're never going to see a fair election. We're never going to see the country I dreamed of when I was a kid growing up in socialist Albania.
Evie Angelikis, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I think it's always fascinating, Dari, when you see the perspective of someone who's watched it from the other part of the globe, who's seen America, who has gone through, frankly, crooked election campaigns. And I think that that's why Evie's experience is so valuable, or her perspective is so valuable.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about while she was speaking, you would think that the Democratic Party and minority populations in this country would be very concerned about losing one man, one vote, because that's in essence what's happening when we see votes changed. Whether it was enough to change the election or not doesn't matter. It's the fact that it was done. And the fact that we're being told, well, we should accept it. There were only a small number of problems. All I'm thinking is it's the top of an iceberg. We don't really know the depth of what happened this time. We know there's a problem. We've identified the software. We've identified the company. It seems that knowing the causation, it seems to me that we can find a solution to the problem.
I think the most telling moment for me personally was when we found out that, in fact, those Dominion machines were indeed linked up to the internet. I guess you could try to make a case one way or the other for everything else that we've been debating about, but the outright lie about those machines not being hooked up to the internet when in fact they were, I think makes their point of view lose all credibility. Let's go to our next guest. Badr Khan is a senior fellow with the National Center for Public Policy Research, a position he has held since 2002. Prior to joining the National Center, he was a senior fellow at the Lexington Institute and the Washington editor of the Earth Times. He currently serves as a senior policy analyst with the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. Badr, welcome back to the program.
I am delighted to be here.
Now, we have spoken on environmental issues a lot, but I know that you've been concentrating lately on an issue that sports fans are paying a lot of attention to, and that's the erasing of our Indian heritage in the United States. Now, I went to a law school, part of a university that had as the name of the team, the Flying Dutchman. We're all familiar with the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, the Minnesota Vikings, the Trojans, the Atlanta Braves, and so forth. Why is there such a move to get rid of these names when, in fact, from most of the conversations I've had, most Native Americans believe that those names are actually honoring the Indian American heritage rather than insulting that heritage?
You're absolutely right. The vast majority of Native Americans that I too have spoken to, they identify with the, in many cases, heroics and in some cases macho elements of these various teams, as you mentioned, the Atlanta Braves or the Cleveland Indians or what have you. And these, with very few exceptions, these Native American groups are not those who are behind this, but rather generally white people, self-anointed elites who have taken it upon themselves to decide what we can and cannot call everything from football teams to baseball teams to whatever. This, they say, is racism. Now, what these people are really doing, and is something that is very dangerous, and it's, by the way, something we have seen before. They are putting race or ethnicity at the very center of how we view those around us. This is identity politics taken to a level that is immensely disturbing, because what it really does is it turns certain groups of Americans against another. Now, does all of this sound familiar? Well, what you really have here is a very dangerous mixture of very fashionable woke Marxism, not communism, but rather Marxism, sprinkled with a considerable portion of National Socialism. That also sounds familiar because, after all, turn back the clock 80 years, and the central organizing principle of the Third Reich was what? Race. In that particular version of it, it was anti-Semitism primarily, but also viewing non-Aryan people as subhumans, making race and ethnicity the central guiding principle of how life was to be conducted. Well, we thought that had been taken care of in 1945. We were wrong. It has come back and is somewhat different guise now, taken over by the left in an attempt to completely transform our society. This is something that is hammered into children from K through 12, and when they have the great misfortune of going to many of our colleges and universities, they will get this hammered into their heads even more. It has also taken over the corporate boardrooms because, remember, these various owners of sports teams are doing what? They're caving on this. They're dropping to their knees, in some cases literally, when bowing before Black Lives Matter. And they are meekly and submissively changing their names, never daring to call into question the whole reasoning behind this enterprise.
Bonner, back in the days when you and I were growing up, not Darius, she's way too young to remember this, but when you and I were growing up, we were taught that America was a melting pot, that we all brought the wisdom, the benefits, the cultural attributes of our ancestors in throughout the world to the United States, and that all became part of the American melting pot. The left has adopted a concept called the mosaic, where rather than becoming one American people, we become like a tile mosaic where each person or each group retains their identity and never really becomes part of the whole. That type of thinking has worked havoc in Europe and throughout the world. Why are folks so eager to bring that concept to the United States when we have so successfully integrated people of every race, every color, every religion into one great people?
Yes, the left would be put in a very, very embarrassing position if someone would simply ask these people, where has that ever worked before? Well, the answer, of course, is it's worked nowhere. And who knows, that may be exactly why they are doing this. After all, their goal is to transform this society. When we say, well, it has worked, the melting pot has worked. And by the way, this clear delineation between one ethnic group and another doesn't work anyway because a lot of us are mutts. We're part Italian, we're part Irish, we're part German, we're part French. We have plenty of mixed race people, Koreans, Barry Whites, and blah blah blah. So you can go down the list because that is the melting pot. That is what worked here remarkably well for hundreds of years. But you see, if you reject American society, then you obviously have to reject all aspects of American society. That includes the melting pot. So out goes the melting pot, in comes the mosaic, with the very predictable consequence that race relations in the U.S. in the year 2020 are now far worse than they were 10, 20, 50, 60 years ago. And I would argue that's precisely what many of these people want. They want to turn us against each other. That will then enable the left to come in with its solutions and further carry out policies that will level the country and mold us in exactly the manner in which they want to see us molded.
You know, Bonner, when I was growing up, we were taught in school that America was like a three-legged stool. On one leg, you had religion, in general, a Judeo-Christian culture that we had here, a Western culture. The second thing that brought the country together was language, that we all spoke the same language. It was good for the economy and good for America. And the third that we had was this process of being American, the idea that our identity doesn't come from our race or anything, it comes from who we are as a people, the spirit of the United States. It seems to me that we've lost, to a degree, the religion, it's been kicked out, the language has been altered, and now this third leg seems like it's about to go. Do you see it that way, that this is the final step?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's nothing coincidental about any of this. All of this has been within a certain, in a certain respect, very well thought through. That is, they are nothing if not holistic in their approach. They're trying to cover as many bases as possible. And if they destroy our cultural heritage, if they destroy our language, and if they can turn one group against another, that's all the better for them. Remember, these people view the United States as the enemy, and they are absolutely determined to transform it. And sadly, they are having a tremendous amount of success in doing so. Look at the decisions that are made in corporate boardrooms today. The latest NASDAQ decision that was handed down yesterday. All of a sudden, we're having quotas in boardrooms, quotas elsewhere. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we decide that quotas were a very bad thing decades and decades ago, and now they are being reimposed? And sadly, the corporate boardroom today bears a little difference in the University of California at Berkeley. What has already turned many of our so-called institutions for higher learning into chaotic places where people are systematically indoctrinated, very young minds in that case. Well, once they get out of that, they can go to work for a large company, and that can be Target, that can be Walmart, that can be God help them, Microsoft or one of the Silicon Valley companies. And there you have rigid speech codes, and there you have rigid quotas where certain groups are favored over others. And that is precisely the kind of world that they are creating. It started off in academia. It has spread well beyond that. It has gone to the corporate boardroom, and it's made its way into the sports world.
Well, you know, Bonner, to be transparent, I'm an avid Redskins fan. I saw my first game in July '73, and win or lose, that little kind of magnet that has the Redskins on it staying up on my refrigerator. You know, what I wonder is how these people that are pushing this would react if we said, you want quotas? Well, let's put quotas on the sports team to make it reflective of the population. I think we'd lose an awful lot of football players if it had to be majority white on the teams. It seems to me that this is definitively a political move. It has nothing to do with real equality.
Oh, no. In fact, the things that they are doing in the name of equality have nothing to do with equality per se, because after all, what are we talking about with equality? There is no way in the world you can ever have equality of outcome because we are not all the same. Some of us are smarter than others. Some of us have more drive, more ambition than others. Some of us, quite frankly, have more luck than others. You know, that's just the way life is. And any attempt to erase those differences to produce an outcome of total equality is doomed to failure. Even in the most egalitarian society imaginable, believe me, there are going to be people calling the shots. There are going to be people running the show. You're going to have a 1% at the top. And they are going to be much more powerful. They're going to be much wealthier than anyone else. So it's ultimately something that can't be achieved. But quite frankly, those pushing this don't really care. As long as they can disrupt society, as long as they can mold the society in their image and destroy what is in front of them, destroy what demonstrably has worked and worked very well for the vast majority of us, as long as they can do that, they will pursue it.
That concept of basically weakening America seems to also go for another issue that I know that you are extraordinarily well informed on, and that is climate. Um, President Trump, of course, pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords. Uh, Joe Biden, I will not call him president elect because I don't think he deserves that title as of yet. Joe Biden has stated that he wants to go back into the Paris Climate Accords. But isn't it a fact that even if all the nations of the world complied 100% with their specific responsibilities, some more, some less than others, under the Paris Climate Accords, that it would make very little difference in the climate, but it would make a big difference in transferring wealth from the United States and Europe to third world countries?
Yes, the Paris Climate Accord has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the climate. The climate is simply the pretext. What they're trying to do is, as you said, redistribute wealth, but not redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. Oh, no. Redistribute wealth from the poor and particularly the middle classes to those who are already very well off. The hedge fund managers, the purveyors of renewable energy, Wall Street, the tech oligarchs on the West Coast. These are the people who stand to benefit the most from the Paris Climate Accord. There is, however, something the Trump administration, if in fact it does have to leave office on January the 20th, there is something President Trump can do between now and then. He can submit, and he should submit, the Paris Climate Accord to the Senate and submit it as a treaty, which it is in all but name. The Obama administration branded what was demonstrably a treaty with obligations and commitments that each country made. But it didn't call it a treaty, it called it an accord or an agreement. Because if it had spoken the truth and said this is a treaty, then it would have had to go to the Senate for an up or down vote, requiring 2/3 of the Senate under the U.S. Constitution. That's 67 votes. Well, they knew they would never get 67 votes for the thing, so they didn't do that. Instead, they said this is, they unilaterally declared the thing an agreement, and then attempted to institute the regulatory measures to which the United States had been committed by Obama negotiators. When President Trump wisely got out of or declared that the United States was going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, which he did on June 1st, 2017, unfortunately, he did it in the worst possible way. He followed a procedure that's in the accord, which allows a signatory nation to exit it after a certain period of time. For the U.S., that was November the 4th, 2020, just a few weeks ago, the day after the election. What President Trump should now do with Joe Biden promising to re-enter the agreement, simply submit the treaty to the Senate. It will never get 67 votes there, irrespective of what happens in Georgia or any place else. The treaty will then have been rejected by the U.S. Senate. The treaty will be gone, baby, gone. And once it is gone, Joe Biden cannot unilaterally get us back in. That would be one of the biggest favors he could perform for the American people before leaving office. He actually said many times that of all the regulatory decisions he made, getting the U.S. out of Paris was the one of which he was most proud. Well, unfortunately, he didn't quite get us out. He got us out, but he got us out the wrong way, because he got us out in a way that a future president could get us back in. But once that agreement / treaty has been rejected by the Senate, there is no way that Biden or anyone else can get us back in.
And indeed, I think the same can be said for the Iranian nuclear deal as well.
That's exactly right.
Another situation that clearly wasn't a treaty,
That
but
was an
something
international
different.
treaty in all but name. Again, Obama, knowing full well he would never get Senate approval for that, did exactly the same thing with that.
Bonner Cohen, Senior Fellow with the National Center for Public Policy Research. Thank you for being on the program. We look forward to our next conversation.
I look forward to it too, and thank you very much for having me.
And to our audience, thanks for tuning in today.
Welcome our newest radio affiliate, Net Talk America in Washington, D.C. at 96.7 FM. We're broadcast throughout the United States on radio and television and worldwide on the web. Watch us on Roku, public broadcast stations, and on the AMFM247.com network. You can access the program on our website at usagovpolicy.com. Join us again next week. We're sponsored by the New York Analysis of Policy and Government, a division of the American Analysis of News and Media, Inc. at usagovpolicy.com and the Institute for American Politics. Email us at truthinradio@gmail.com.
Our producer is the amazing Abigail White, and our director is the brilliant Jeff Hansen.